Hello and welcome to the fourth lesson on poems in the Power and Conflict anthology. Today we'll be covering My Last Duchess by Robert Browning. Let's start off by listening to a reading of the poem by Comics and Lit. Like Extract from the Prelude, it is another lengthy one, but don't worry, it will make more sense when we break it down.
That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Fra Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one, my favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace. All and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush, at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even if you had skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one, and say, just this or that in you disgusts me. Here you miss, or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me.
So, now that you've heard the whole poem, it's time for some analysis. Let's start with the title, My Last Duchess. Already we have the possessive determiner, my, showing us that the speaker sees his last Duchess as his property, something that becomes even clearer as the poem progresses. We know that the Duchess was the speaker's wife, which would make him a duke, but the adjective last here is ambiguous. Does it mean his final wife, or the most recent? In any case, it helps to know that the poem is a dramatic monologue written in the first person from the perspective of a real-life 16th century Duke of Ferrara, Alfonso II. The Duchess referred to in the poem is widely believed to be his first wife. who died just 2 years after marrying him at the age of 16. Though most accept that she died of tuberculosis, which was a common illness at the time, rumours circulated that the Duke had her poisoned. These rumours appear to be the source of inspiration for Browning's poem, which serves as an insightful look into the abuse of political and patriarchal power. It also explores the conflict and tension between perception and reality. By the way, examiner reports say that it's very common for students to misunderstand this poem, seeing it as the speaker grieving the loss of his wife. Hopefully this video, combined with your own research, will show you that this is very much not the case. As we go through the poem, I'll be including some more relevant contextual facts about it, and about Browning himself. Let's start with lines 1 to 4. The title reappears in the first line, but we come to learn that the Duke is directing attention not towards his actual wife, but towards a portrait of her. Line 2 ambiguously tells us that the portrait shows her looking as if she were alive. This could mean that the portrait looks lifelike, or, more disturbingly and accurately, this is the speaker's way of making it clear that his wife is dead. The speaker then returns the attention to himself, something that recurs throughout the poem, by saying, "I call that piece a wonder, now." The emphasis on the time marker now makes it seem like he previously didn't consider the painting a wonder. It becomes clear later on why the Duke took issue with the circumstances that led to the creation of the painting, but even in lines 2 to 4, the speaker seems to hint at what's going on. On the one hand, Fra Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands, could simply be the Duke proudly name-dropping an artist he commissioned to paint his wife's portrait, commenting on how his hard work led to the creation of an impressive work of art. On the other hand, the emphasis on the artist's busy hands could have sexual connotations, suggesting that the Duke is imagining his wife having an affair. If this reading is correct, and there she stands seems to suggest that the Duchess's supposed infidelity, which appears to be nothing more than a product of the Duke's imagination, is what led to her death. Though the poem shows the intense control the Duke has on those around him, there are several hints that he is perhaps not as powerful as he or others might think. Indeed, the term Fra means brother, which means that the artist who painted the portrait of the Duchess was a priest. So if the Duke is imagining a holy man having a sexual relationship with his wife, it suggests that he was gripped by immense paranoia, jealousy, and possibly even madness. You could even describe him as a megalomaniac, or someone with an obsessive desire for power. The phrase mad with power comes to mind.
Sir, I'm afraid you've gone mad with power.
Of course I have. You ever tried going mad without power? It's boring. No one listens to you.
Moving on to lines 5 to 12, line 5 begins with a rhetorical question, which is a thinly disguised command, as the speaker asks his guest to please sit and look at the painting. He name drops Fra Pandolf again, another attempt to boast about his connections, even though Fra Pandolf is actually a fictional painter, before explaining to his guest how many others have looked at the painting before and wondered the same thing. How did the artist capture his wife's expression? He describes his wife as having an earnest glance, which has connotations of innocence and naivety. This makes it all the more shocking to think that he wanted her dead for some apparent transgression. In parentheses or brackets, Browning states that the Duke keeps his wife's portrait behind a curtain, which nobody is allowed to touch except for him. It's striking that his sinister monopoly he desires to have over his wife is continuing even after her death. I think the reference to the curtain, like the Duke's tendency to name drop, also hints at his superficial character. It's like he's putting on a performance, attempting to wow his audience with his possessions. His arrogance becomes even clearer when he adds that people ask him about his wife's expression if they durst or dare. It's like the Duke considers it audacious for anyone but him to even talk about his wife. In lines 12 to 21, the Duke continues to obsess over the relationship he imagines his wife had with other men, particularly Fra Pandolf, whom he name-drops for a third time. He mentions twice a spot of joy appearing on the Duchess's face, and how 'twas not her husband's presence only that caused it to appear. Interestingly, this is the first and only time the Duke refers to himself in the third person instead of the first, which, let's face it, often comes across as a pretty pompous thing to do anyway. The technical name for this is Iliism, and the reason for Browning's use of it in this part of the poem, and only in this part, isn't entirely clear. Is the Duke trying to distance himself from the situation? Or is his emphasis on husband designed to convey his sincere belief that her blushing was a betrayal of their marriage vows? Equally, it could be Browning criticising the attitudes to women's sexuality of his time. Indeed, it was common in the Victorian era to connect excessive blushing in women with flirtation and sexual desire, and the desire for anyone besides one's husband was deemed unacceptable. It's interesting that the Duchess is not portrayed as the instigator of these flirtatious encounters, as the Duke instead imagines Fra Pandolf commenting on her blushing and how her clothing covered her too much. He instead portrays his wife as an all-too-willing recipient of male attention, However, Browning hints once again at how excessive and frankly unnecessary the Duke's jealousy is in his description of the faint half-flush that dies along his wife's throat. This tells us that the Duchess isn't intensely blushing, but instead appears to have a slight rosiness to her complexion, again portraying her as genuinely innocent. Still, the image of the flush dying along her throat is an ominous one, clearly foreshadowing her tragic fate. In lines 21 to 34, the Duke comes across as even more insecure, detailing what he perceives as the Duchess's indiscriminate appreciation of the world around her. Immediately after "she had a heart," Browning includes a caesura, as the Duke stops and tries to think of how to best phrase what he's about to say. The deliberate pause here forces the reader to linger on the Duchess's obvious emotional core, her heart, in stark contrast to her heartless and possibly murderous husband. There is irony in the Duke struggling to find the right words, as he's clearly a very eloquent speaker. Browning's repetition of "too" in "too soon made glad" and "too easily impressed" once again shows how the Duke believes his wife overstepped the mark, as if this is some sort of justification for his criminal and immoral actions. The Duke then expresses his disbelief at his wife's tendency to apparently experience equal joy in all things, as evidenced by Browning's use of an exclamation mark. He then once again brings the attention back to himself with the determiner "my," as he puts his favour at her breast as the first item in a list of things that his wife enjoyed. This favour could be a reference to jewellery, possibly a necklace, and the term breast also has sexual connotations. This again shows how superficial the Duke is, and how he uses his political and personal power to objectify his wife. It's worth noting that the subsequent items he lists are all natural phenomena: sunset, fruit, and an animal. This shows a conflict between the values of the Duke and those of his wife. While the former is fixated on such material possessions as fine artwork, the latter takes pleasure in the simpler, more natural things in the world. The alliterative D sound in "dropping of the daylight," as well as the image of a setting sun, has strong connotations of death, foreshadowing to the reader that the Duke will soon divulge more information on his wife's fate. The Duke shows how condescending he is when he refers to the man who brought his wife cherries as some officious fool. This again suggests that Browning wrote this poem as a critique of those who wield their power in an immoral manner, or for personal gain, without consideration of the needs of others. Though the white mule he refers to would typically be an animal prized for its beauty and grace, here, if we consider the fact that mules are usually sterile, it might be the Duke's way of juxtaposing his power with the mule's lack thereof. Similarly, a mule is a hybrid or a mixture of a donkey and a horse, essentially the opposite of a purebred, which is what the Duke would pride himself on being, thanks to his powerful lineage and ancestry. He then goes on to refer once more to his wife's blushing in response to the gifts men gave her, before making another exclamatory remark on perhaps the only good thing his wife ever did in his eyes. She said thank you. This may be another way of Browning highlighting the overly sensitive nature of Victorian values, especially towards manners and civility in the context of female behaviour. However, this somewhat positive remark is quickly undercut after another caesura, in which the Duke admits he doesn't know exactly how his wife thanked these men. It seems his imagination has once again got the better of him, as he's likely picturing his wife having multiple affairs as a way of showing her gratitude, and he just can't get his head around the idea that his 900-year-old name, essentially his political power, is just as valuable to her as anything else. In lines 34 to 46, the speaker imagines what it might have been like to have a conversation with his wife about his concerns. He makes a disingenuous claim about lacking skill in speech, despite speaking in perfect iambic pentameter the whole time. This is a highly controlled style of speech, making the idea that the Duke is struggling for words all the more absurd. In any case, he justifies not having shared these concerns with his wife by stating that doing so would involve stooping. In other words, such a conversation would be beneath him. This shows how extreme his self-obsession is, and how far he considers his own wife to be inferior. The fact that he chooses never to stoop, emphasis on never, paints him as someone who wields absolute power, which is ironic given how he seems to be losing his mind. This is made even clearer in the next few lines, where the Duke essentially suggests that he had his wife killed because she gave the same smile to him as she did to others. The fact that he gave commands euphemistically shows how he was able to get his subordinates to do his dirty work, using his power to his advantage, as it allows him, quite literally, to get away with murder. Then all smiles stop together serves as an indirect but chilling description of the moment of his wife's death. Finally, in lines 46 to 56, the poem comes full circle as the speaker repeats, "There she stands as if alive." This gives the impression that the Duke has given a full account of, and even an adequate justification for, why he had her murdered. He then asks his guest another rhetorical question, which is actually a command, but this time he asks him to stand up rather than sit down. We then discover that his guest is actually an emissary for a count who's looking to marry his daughter to the Duke. So the entire visit has been about the Duke securing his next Duchess. Once again, his superficial nature is revealed as he shares what he cares about the most: money, as evidenced by his view that he can command any dowry, and beautiful objects, made clear by his reference to the Count's daughter's fair self, whom he now calls his object. Lastly, the Duke drops another name, Klaus of Innsbruck, as he commands his guest to notice his rare bronze statue of Neptune taming a seahorse. This is perhaps best understood in the Victorian context in which Browning was writing. According to the writer Hannah Aspinall, there was a 19th century pornographical trope of the masculine breaking in of the horse, exacting power over the female in order to tame her wilder tendencies and turn her into the pinnacle of domesticity. For the paranoid Duke, what better way to turn his wife into the pinnacle of domesticity than to have her hanging on the wall of his home, hidden behind a curtain, looking as if she were alive? For further analysis of the poem, please refer to the flirt table on the accompanying worksheet. And remember, I've been sharing my analysis of the poem. The examiners want you to share your own informed, personal response to it. So while you can certainly use my analysis to give you some ideas, you ultimately need to develop your own take on it that can be backed up by relevant references. The best way to do this is to focus on what you personally find most interesting about the poem, thinking about what the words or phrases remind you of, and tying them into the themes of power and conflict. Now, on to the quiz. I've designed these questions to help you consolidate and review the key points discussed in this video. If you haven't already, grab a pen and a piece of paper. I'll be asking 10 multiple choice questions about My Last Duchess. I'll read each question once and I'll pause to give you some time to write down your answer. After I've asked all the questions, I'll read out the answers so that you can give yourself a score out of 10. Here we go. Question 1. What title does the speaker of the poem have? Is it A, Duke, B, Prince, or C, King? Question 2. What does Browning suggest the speaker is doing in the poem? Is it A, grieving the death of his wife, B, hinting to his guest that he had his wife killed, or C, painting a portrait of his late wife? Question 3. The painter of the Duchess's portrait is Fra Pandolf. What does Fra mean? Is it A, Lord, showing that he was a landowner, B, Father, showing that he was a priest, or C, Brother, showing that he was a priest? Question 4. What is the Duchess's portrait hidden behind? Is it A, a door, B, a curtain, C, a bookcase, or D, a veil? Question 5. True or false? The speaker only ever refers to himself in the first person. Is it A, true, or B, false? Question 6. What is a caesura? Is it A, a pause near the middle of a line, B, the beginning of a new stanza, or C, a full stop at the end of a line? Question 7. In Victorian times, which of the following was perceived as a sign of sexual desire? Was it A, excessive eating, B, horse riding, or C, excessive blushing? Question 8. Which of the following is an example of the speaker being disingenuous? Is it A, he chooses never to stoop, B, he claims he lacks skill in speech, or C, he gave commands to have his wife murdered? Question 9. Complete the quote. There she stands. Is it A, as if alive, B, as if dead, or C, as if my wife? Question 10. What does the speaker direct his guest's attention to at the end of the poem? Is it A, a painting of another one of his wives, B, a book about Renaissance art, or C, a statue of Neptune taming a seahorse? Now it's time for the answers. For question 1, the speaker of the poem has the title of Duke. We know this because his wife was a Duchess, so the answer is A. For question 2, Browning is suggesting that the speaker is hinting to his guest that he had his wife killed. The painting was completed in her lifetime, and he's certainly not grieving his loss, which we now know is a common mistake students make. So the answer is B. For question 3, the Fra in Fra Pandolf means brother, showing that he was a priest. So the answer is C. For question 4, the Duchess's portrait is hidden behind a curtain that only the Duke has control over. So the answer is B. For question 5, the speaker mostly refers to himself in the first person, apart from on one occasion when he refers to himself in the third person. So the answer is B. False. For question 6, a caesura is a pause near the middle of a line, as in the case where the Duke claims he's looking for the right words to describe his wife. So the answer is A. For question 7, in Victorian times, excessive blushing was perceived as a sign of sexual desire, particularly in women. So the answer is C. For question 8, the speaker is being disingenuous or dishonest when he claims he lacks skill in speech. So the answer is B. For question 9, the quote is "There she stands as if alive." So the answer is A. And finally, for question 10, at the end of the poem, the speaker directs his guest's attention to a statue of Neptune taming a seahorse. So the answer is C. Remember to count your score to see how you did on the quiz, and don't forget to use the accompanying worksheets to revise and further your knowledge of My Last Duchess. See you in the next video.